Hey guys, welcome back to another great game of CEDH. Today we have a star-studded guest list. But I know it's a bit repetitive, but I just finished making all the different guild sweatshirts, and they came out so cool. So if you want to help support the channel and get some sweet apparel out of it, come check it out. Also, MC Chicago is coming up fast, so if you're planning on attending, let me know in the comments down below, as I'll be recording CEDH all weekend long. Starting us off is Hidden on Rielle. This is it discard matters, letting you net positive such on cards like Faithless Looting to dig deep and assemble an Underworld Breach combo. Next up is Dan from the CEDH network, rocking a signature brew. Rog Jeska is a mono-red partner pairing, aiming to leverage Blood Moon effects to control greedy mana bases and Jeska to control creatures. In the third spot, we have Kai, better known as Fervent Alchemist, on Stella. This is an interesting Is-It commander to say the least. It is a bunch of redundant one-card combos along with a lot of value off just casting multiple spells in a turn. And bringing up the rear, we have the one and only comedian on Karlach, Feywild Visitor. I don't know how to describe this other than Is-It Winota, aiming for an aggressive counter snowball strategy, letting you grow a board basically out of nowhere. Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board.
Hidden starts off the game with a volcanic island into a Chromox, imprinting a swan song. Dan starts off his turn with his commander Edhrec into a basic mountain. Kai has a quick turn, just playing out a Misty and passing. Ian also has a Misty, as he plays and cracks the land for a volcanic, tapping it to cast a Mana Vault. Hidden plays out an island and taps out for his commander Rielle. Dan has an Ancient Tomb and takes 2 as he taps it to help cast a Jeska's Will. He'll gain 6 red and exile an Urza's Saga, Prophetic Ravings, and a Conjurer's Bauble. He'll then cast the Ravings, enchanting his Rog, and immediately tap it to discard a mountain to draw. Next comes the Conjurer's Bauble, which also is immediately cracked to put the Jeska's Will on bottom and draw him another card. He then follows that up with a Loyal Apprentice and uses the last of his mana to cast his other commander Jeska. Dan then heads to combat, making a Thopter off his Apprentice and sending the Apprentice at Kai for 2. With Kai at end step, cracking his Misty for a Thundering Falls, using the Surveil trigger to keep the card on top. Kai then heads to his turn, draws his kept card, and plays out a Crystal Vein as land return, cracking it for 2 mana to let him tap out for a Rhystic Study, passing as the enchantment resolves. Ian has a mountain as land return and taps the Mana Vault to help him cast the Pollywog Prodigy. He'll pay the 1 and then follow that up with a Brazen Collector. He gives a card to Kai off the Rhystic, but the creature resolves, evolving the Pollywog as well. Hidden plays out an Ancient Tomb and cycles a Go for Blood. He'll get an extra draw off Rielle, but passes it there. Dan starts off with combat. He makes another Thopter and sends the Apprentice at Hidden and a Thopter at Ian. There are no blocks, with Dan on his second main down-ticking Jeska to bring the Brazen Collector, Pollywog, and Kai.
So I'm going to throw it out there. If you followed up with a recast of Jeska to kill the frog, I'm going to force it and Kai's going to draw 2 cards.
He doesn't have the mana to recast Jeska.
I
Okay,
don't, and I love the politics. I'm gonna go for it anyway.
And while he might not be able to recast Jeska, he will put a Lightning Bolt on the stack. Dan will pay the 1 and draw Ian a card. But Ian is true to his word as he forces it, exiling a Curiosity. This puts a Rhystic trigger on the stack, but to Ian's horror, Hidden will respawn with a Mana Drain. Hidden will take 2 damage to pay for the Rhystic and counters the force. Kai will then draw, and the bolt ends up resolving, with Dan then tapping his Rog to rummage away at Tybalt's Trickery, ending his turn with a mountain into a Torch Courier, using the last of his floating mana to pay the 1. Kai plays out a Shivan Reef into an inactive Mox Opal, passing after that. Ian untaps and takes 1 from his Mana Vault, ending his turn with an Ottawa as land for turn. Hidden untaps and gains 5 colors off the Mana Drain, which he uses to cast a Seagate Restoration. He'll pay the 1 and draw 4 cards. He then shocks in a steam vents and passes it there. Dan starts off his turn taking 2 to cast a Soul Ring, paying for the Rhystic. He then uses Rog to rummage away a Vexing Bauble and heads to combat. He'll make another Thopter and send everything but 1 Thopter at Kai for 5. Kai in response brainstorms, but has no further actions as he takes the hit, and at end step otherworldly gazes to put a Brain Freeze into his graveyard. Kai will then play out a Training Center as land for turn and cast his commander, Stella Lee, passing it there, with Ian at end step flashing in Malcolm, the alluring scoundrel, paying the 1. Ian untaps, takes his 1, and then heads to combat. He sends the flyer at hidden and gets to loot as the pirate connects.
Bonk. Loot time.
Damn, everyone is looting but me.
Yeah, what's up, dude?
I know. Ian will discard a 1 ring, playing and cracking an Arid Mesa on his second main to grab out an untapped Steam Vents, ending his turn with his own Rhystic and giving a card to Kai off his. With hidden at end step Mystical Tutoring. He'll pay for both Rhystics and finds a Firestorm to put on top. Hidden then untaps and draws his tutored card, casting it and discarding an LED, Flesh Duplicate, Riverglide Pathway, and a Rite of Flame. This will put a Rielle trigger on the stack, with Hidden targeting the Malcolm, Stella Lee, Loyal Apprentice, and Rograk. But Kai has a response, as he Force of Wills it, pitching a Harbinger of the Seas. Ian will draw off his Rhystic, but the spell is countered, with the only upside is Hidden at least gets to refresh his hand off the Rielle. Hidden will then play out a Misty and heads to combat, sending a 6-power Rielle at Kai for Retribution. Dan untaps and once again taps Rog to rummage away another mountain. He has a Cavern of Souls as land and names Goblins. Combat is then held, with him making another Thopter, and this time sending 6 at Kai as well, who will block the Torch Courier with Stella. With Dan on his second main recasting Jeska. He pays for both Rhystic, with Hidden in response cracking his fetch for a basic island, and then using it to cycle a Spark Spray to draw 2 due to Rielle. But the Walker resolves and down ticks for 3 to deal 3 damage to Stella, Rielle, and Malcolm.
This is premium content. This game is going places, you know what I mean? Like,
I mean,
to a draw,
it
if
is
we were in
certainly
the
going
8K.
places. Kai has a Volcanic as land for turn, and with the help of an exiled Simian Spirit Guide, casts his own Jeska's Will, targeting Hidden for 5 red mana. He gives a card to Ian and uses the floating mana to recast Stella, this time paying the 1. Ian untaps and takes 1. He'll then play and crack a Flooded Strand to find an island of his own, tapping out to cast his own commander, Karlach, giving a card to Kai. Hidden has another island, but leaves his mana open and passes. Dan continues to rummage as he discards a Gemstone Caverns and has a combat. He'll make another Thopter and sends 4 damage at Kai, with Dan on his second main recasting Jeska once again, this time not being able to pay for either Rhystic. But the Planeswalker resolves, although she doesn't stay long as he -4s her to do 4 damage to Stella, Karlach, and 4 to Kai himself. Kai then starts off his own turn with a Lotus Petal. He feeds a card to Ian and then follows it up with a Wheel of Fortune. There's a Rhystic trigger, but Ian declines the draw, with Hidden then responding to the wheel as he casts a Chain of Vapor targeting Ian's Rhystic. He'll pay 1 for both Rhystics, but can't convince Ian to sack a land to also remove Kai's Rhystic as well. The wheel then resolves, with everyone discarding and drawing, with a notable discard being an Underworld Breach from Hidden. Kai then follows all that up with a Jeweled Amulet into a Brawl, Chief of Compliance, ending his turn with a Mox Amber. Ian continues to take 1 off his tap vault and has a Prismatic Vista as land. He then spends 3 mana on a Seething Song and gives a card to Kai. Ian will then recast Karlach and feed another card to Kai, with Hidden at end step firing off a Vampire's Vengeance, dealing 2 to the board and gaining a blood, with Hidden then paying the 1 off the Rhystic and using the rest of his mana to sacrifice the blood, discarding a Mox Diamond. With a notable mention being that Dan let his Rograk go to the graveyard. Hidden then untaps and casts a Magus of the Moon, paying the 1 and passing the turn. Dan plays out an Arena of Mountains and casts a Goblin Engineer. He'll pay for Rhystic and bins a Cloudstone Curio, following that up with the Fear of Missing Out. He pays the 1 and on ETB discards a Great Furnace, with Kai at end step putting a blue mana into his Amulet. Kai untaps and for 7 recasts Stella, following her up with a Mox Diamond. This is Kai's second spell as he exiles a mountain off the top. He will discard a Bloodstained Mire from his Mox and has a basic island as land for turn. He then cracks his Petal to help cast the Finale of Promise, where X equals 3, targeting the Jeska's Will and Brainstorm. But this seems like a bit too much value, as Hidden then gives Kai an offer he can't refuse. But for once, it doesn't pay the 1. Kai will draw and then make 2 treasures off his spell being countered. Ian then heads to his turn and plays a Wooded Foothills as land for turn. He'll then cast a Feywild Visitor from his command zone and pays for Rhystic. Next up is combat, as Karlach turns sideways at Dan, with Ian on attack gaining his team first strike and untapping her. Dan will take the hit and gain Ian a Fairy Dragon, with Ian setting Karlach at Hidden on his second attack, gaining him another fairy, with Ian then ending his turn with a Mox Opal, paying the 1. Hidden on his turn taps 5 to recast Rielle, paying the 1 but passing it there. Dan on his turn casts his own Mox Opal, paying the 1 and ending his turn with a Mog Fanatic, continuing to pay the 1. Kai will then play out his Exiled Mountain as land for turn and cast a Merchant Scroll. He'll find a Cerulean Wisp and then cast a Final Fortune. This triggers Stella to exile a Mana Confluence off the top, but no one responds to the Final Fortune. Kai then casts a Cerulean Wisp targeting his own Baral, but holding priority activates Stella to try and copy the spell. But Hidden will respond with a Mental Misstep, paying the 1. But in response to that, Kai puts a Refocus on the stack, targeting Stella, with Dan this time responding with the Thunderclap, targeting Stella. Dan will pay the 1, but Kai's not letting up, as he then flashes back his Otherworldly Gaze. He'll bin all 3 cards and then cast a Flusterstorm with storm count 8, putting 4 on the mental and 5 copies on the clap, with Dan then activating his Goblin Engineer to sacrifice his Mox Opal to bring back his Cloudstone Curio, as he then sacrifices the Goblin to a Flare of Denial, copying the Mental Misstep to also target the Wisps. He pays the 1 and the Mental takes out the Wisps, with the Flusterstorm then countering the Thunderclap. But this will put a Baral trigger to loot on the stack, with Ian responding to that with a Flusterstorm to counter the Refocus. He'll also pay the 1, with the rest of the stack then clearing and giving Kai a total of 2 loots off Baral, with Kai then following all that up with a Spellseeker, who finds a Mystical Tutor off the search trigger, finally ending his turn putting another mana into his Jeweled Amulet. Kai then passes it to himself and on upkeep Mystical Tutors, but Hidden has been sandbagging a Fierce Guardianship. Kai will draw off the Rhystic, but fires off a Dramatic Reversal to untap his stuff and trigger Stella, to exile an Ancient Tomb off the top. The Tutor is then countered, with Kai then drawing for turn, but having to pass and lose on end step. Ian then untaps and casts a Rionia the Fire Dancer. He heads to combat and uses the Rionia trigger to make an extra Fairy Dragon, and sends Karlach at Hidden, with the 3 fairies heading at Dan. He gets the Karlach attack trigger, with Hidden then chumping with his Magus, and Dan taking 3. With Ian then heading to his second attack, making another fake dragon off Rionia. This time, Karlach heads back at Hidden, and now 4 dragons head at Dan. All damage is then taken, with Ian then making a real dragon, and exiling the 2 fake ones as he ends his turn there. Hidden untaps and casts a Burning Inquiry. Everyone draws and discards 3 at random, with Hidden getting an extra 3 off his Rielle trigger. He then follows it up with a Harmonic Prodigy and ends his turn with a Shivan Reef as land for turn. Dan starts off his turn with an Underworld Breach, with Ian in response delaying it. Dan then plays out a Crystal Vein and casts an Anya's Ravager, with Hidden at end step Tolarian Winding. He discards his hand of 4 and draws, and thanks to the Prodigy, gets 2 Rielle triggers to draw him 8 more cards. Ian then untaps, and in his upkeep cracks both his Wooded Foothills and Bloodstained Mires for 2 mountains. He then heads to his first main and dashes in a Ragavan, and heads to combat. He makes a dragon off Rionia and full sends it Hidden. Karlach triggers, with Hidden blocking Rionia with his Harmonic Prodigy, and the Monkey with Rielle. But before damage happens, Hidden cycles a Lonely Sandbar, drawing 3, and then follows it up with a Lightning Bolt, targeting Rionia. There is a Prowess trigger, but unfortunately for Hidden, Ian has a miscast on the bolt, fizzling the spell. The Prodigy will survive the attack, but Ian makes another dragon off Karlach connecting. Ian then heads to his second attack, and due to his miscast, makes 2 dragons off Rionia, with Ian continuing to full send everything back at Hidden. With Hidden knowing he's dead, doesn't block, and gets knocked out, with Ian making 1 more dragon when his commander connects, exiling the fake dragons at end step. Dan then untaps and finds a mountain off the top. He heads to combat and sends his Ravager and Fear at Ian. He targets his Ravager with the FOMO trigger, and then resolves the Ravager trigger to discard his non-existent hand to draw 3. Ian doesn't block and takes 5, with Dan on his second combat sending the Ravager back in, discarding his hand once again to draw 3 more cards, with this time Ian chumping with one of his dragons. Dan then on his second main has enough mana to recast his commander Jeska, with Ian being empty-handed, the Planeswalker resolves, and down ticks 4 to take out Karlach, Rionia, and a Fairy Dragon. Ian untaps and takes 1 from his tap vault. He recasts Karlach and heads back to combat, but before he can attack, Dan casts a Pyrokinesis to take the commander out, with Ian then turning 2 of his fairies at Jeska and the other one at Dan's face. There are no blocks, with Ian passing after that. Dan heads straight to combat on his turn. He sends his Ravager and FOMO at Ian. This time, the FOMO will target itself, as Dan discards his hand to draw 3 off the Ravager. Dan will send the FOMO then back at Ian on his second attack, with Dan on his second main playing out a City of Traders as land, and once again recasting Jeska, this time only downticking 1 to clear away the rest of Ian's creatures. Ian untaps, takes 1, and seeing the breach coming, concedes, giving Dan the game.
Man, that was a blast, and I thought I had it after we managed to fend Kai off, but maybe I should have held off on the Tolarian winds and not showed how much a threat I was, which might have stopped Ian from full sending it, I don't know. But one thing I realized back on Kai's turn was the safer line was actually for Dan to use his Flare to copy his Thunderclap to take Stella out, instead of Ian having to use another counter on the refocus. But man, that was a battle, and it was great getting to play with everyone. Thanks to everyone that joined for the game, and before everyone leaves, I want to thank our special Patreon members, Slyfox and Holy Septic, for their support of the channel, along with all of our other Patreon supporters as well. And remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. I'll see you guys later.